year was 1776. The world watched as the 13 American colonies stood on the edge of a decision that would change history forever. For more than a decade, they had lived in conflict with the British Crown. Protests had been met with punishment. Petitions had been met with silence. And muskets had already spoken at Lexington, Concord, and Bunker Hill. Yet even as war raged, the colonies had not declared independence. Many clung to loyalty, still hoping for reconciliation. They were Englishmen, bound by ties of blood, language, and tradition. But events were pressing them toward a choice that could not be undone. To declare independence was to sever all bonds with the mightiest empire in the world. It was to risk execution as traitors. It was to leap into the unknown. And yet, it was also to claim liberty. To declare that governments derive their power from the consent of the governed. To proclaim that all men are created equal. To set in motion an idea that would inspire nations across the globe. This is the story of the Declaration of Independence. How it was written, debated, signed, and remembered. The birth of a nation, not in silence, but in words that echoed louder than any musket shot. By 1775, the colonies were already at war. The battles of Lexington and Concord had shattered the illusion of peace. The Second Continental Congress had assembled in Philadelphia, appointing George Washington as Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army. Still, Congress hesitated. Some, like John Adams of Massachusetts, saw independence as inevitable. Others, like John Dickinson of Pennsylvania, urged patience, hoping for reconciliation. In July 1775, Congress sent the Olive Branch Petition to King George III. One last plea for peace. But the king rejected it outright. Instead, he declared the colonies to be in open rebellion. He would send more troops, more ships, more punishment. By early 1776, the tide was shifting. The British blockade strangled colonial trade. Loyalists and patriots clashed in the streets. And then, a pamphlet appeared. One that changed everything. In January 1776, a pamphlet titled Common Sense swept through the colonies like wildfire. Its author, Thomas Paine, was a recent immigrant from England, a man of humble origins with a gift for words. Paine's message was clear and bold: America must declare independence. He mocked the idea of reconciliation. Why, he asked, should a vast continent be ruled by a small island? Why should free men bow to a king who cared nothing for their liberty? Paine did not write for scholars or elites. He wrote for farmers, merchants, soldiers. For the common people. His words were fiery, direct, and unforgettable. Monarchy was tyranny, and the time for independence was now. Within weeks, Common Sense sold over 100,000 copies. A staggering number for the time. It was read aloud in taverns, debated in town meetings, and carried by soldiers in their packs. Public opinion began to turn. Independence was no longer whispered about in secret. It was demanded in the open. As spring of 1776 arrived, the Continental Congress found itself at a crossroads. Delegates from New England and Virginia pressed for independence. They argued that Britain had left them no choice. Blood had already been spilled. The colonies must declare themselves free. But others remained cautious. Delegates from New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and the Carolinas feared the risks. Could the colonies survive against Britain's armies and navy? Would foreign nations recognize them? Would they descend into chaos without British rule? The debates were fierce. John Adams, ever fiery, urged bold action. "We are in the very midst of revolution," he declared. "Why should we hesitate?" But John Dickinson counseled caution. Independence, he warned, would unleash dangers they could not control. The question divided the room, but the momentum was shifting. State assemblies and local conventions began instructing their delegates to support independence. The people demanded it. By June 1776, the tide could no longer be resisted. On June 7, 1776, Richard Henry Lee of Virginia rose before Congress and introduced a simple, yet earth-shattering resolution. That these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states. The words struck like thunder. The debate that followed was heated and intense. Some delegates were ready to vote immediately. Others demanded delay, needing time to consult their assemblies. It was decided, the vote would be postponed until July. But in the meantime, a committee would be formed to draft a declaration, should independence be approved. Congress appointed 5 men to draft the declaration: Thomas Jefferson of Virginia, John Adams of Massachusetts, Benjamin Franklin of Pennsylvania, Roger Sherman of Connecticut, Robert R. Livingston of New York. The youngest among them, only 33, was Thomas Jefferson. Tall, reserved, and known for his eloquent writing, Jefferson was chosen to take the lead. Adams later explained, Jefferson could write with a grace that few others possessed. And besides, Adams knew his own style was fiery and confrontational. He was better suited to defend a document than to draft it. So Jefferson retreated to his lodgings on Market Street in Philadelphia. There, by candlelight, he set pen to paper. For days, Jefferson wrote and rewrote. He drew upon the ideas of Enlightenment philosophers, John Locke, Montesquieu, and others. He reflected the grievances of the colonies, the spirit of Paine, the urgency of Adams. The result was a document both simple and profound. It began not with complaints, but with principles. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It declared that governments exist to protect these rights, and that when they fail, the people have the right to alter or abolish them. Then came the list of grievances. The king had dissolved colonial legislatures. He had imposed taxes without consent. He had quartered soldiers among the people. He had waged war against them, plundering their coasts, burning their towns, and hiring foreign mercenaries. Jefferson even included a powerful condemnation of the slave trade, blaming the king for perpetuating human bondage. But this passage would not survive the debates. When Jefferson laid down his pen, he had written words that would outlive him, words that would shape a nation. On June 28, 1776, Jefferson's draft was presented to Congress. For days, the delegates debated and revised. Some objected to Jefferson's soaring rhetoric. Others demanded changes to the grievances. Southern delegates, along with representatives from New England, struck out the passage on slavery, fearful that it would divide the colonies and alienate allies. Jefferson sat silently as his words were cut and reshaped. "I was writhing under the mutilations," he later recalled. Yet the heart of the document remained, the Declaration of Liberty, the assertion of rights, the charge against tyranny. On July 2, 1776, Congress voted on Richard Henry Lee's resolution for independence. The result was clear: 12 colonies voted in favor. Only New York abstained, lacking instructions from its assembly. John Adams, exultant, wrote that July 2nd would be remembered as the greatest day in American history. But it was July 4, the day the final text of the Declaration was approved, that would become immortal. On the morning of July 4, 1776, in the Pennsylvania State House, now Independence Hall, the Continental Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence. The bell in the tower did not ring that day, despite legend. But the news spread quickly, carried by horse and by word of mouth. That evening, copies were sent to the states and to the army. In cities and towns, the Declaration was read aloud to cheering crowds. Bonfires burned, bells rang, and in New York, the statue of King George III was pulled down and melted into musket balls. The colonies were no longer colonies. They were the United States of America. The Declaration was more than a political statement. It was a revolutionary idea. In Britain, it was dismissed as the work of traitors. In Europe, it was read with fascination. In France, in particular, it struck a chord. The language of liberty and equality would echo in their own revolution a decade later. Even centuries later, its words would inspire independence movements around the globe. From Latin America to Africa, from Asia to Eastern Europe. In August 1776, delegates began signing the parchment copy of the Declaration. At the top stood the bold signature of John Hancock, so large that, as legend has it, he declared the king could read it without his spectacles. 56 men would ultimately sign their names, pledging their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. They knew the risks. If captured, they would hang. But they signed anyway, knowing that freedom demanded sacrifice. The Declaration of Independence was not merely a list of grievances. It was a statement of principle, a manifesto of human liberty. It declared that governments derive their power not from kings, but from the people. That rights are not granted, but inherent. That freedom is not a gift, but a birthright. In July 1776, the 13 colonies dared to proclaim these truths to the world. And in doing so, they did not just found a nation. They lit a flame that still burns today. We hold these truths to be self-evident. Those words continue to echo, a reminder that the struggle for liberty is never finished, and that the power of ideas can change the course of history.